It is with greatest pleasure that I bring to you this evening a dreadful tale, a strange tale, written by Alex Hammer. The tale I read for you now is known only as the Pleading Ghost. On that blustery night, Dr. Giuseppe Stopolini, a professor of clinical psychology in Camerino, Italy, was conducting an informal class for students of the occult. Stopolini, a pragmatic, businesslike man whose field of study was emotionally disturbed children, had no personal interest in the occult. He considered it, in his own words, stuff and nonsense. It was, he said, a pseudo-study of the undisciplined mind. However, Stopolini, small, portly, and vain, was very interested in students of the occult themselves. He said to a friend, "These occultists are highly disturbed people, both emotionally and mentally. By studying them, I can learn something that will be of real value to me in my own practice." On September 3rd, 1950, Stopolini introduced a medium named Maria Bocca to a group of 20 occult enthusiasts gathered in his home on the Via Palermo. Bocca was then in her early 60s, an overweight, motherly-looking woman who had gained an excellent reputation among spiritualists as an effective medium and psychic. After the introductions were made, Bocca sat in the middle of the room and seemed to go into a trance. For the best part of an hour, she spoke in the quite recognizable voices of dead men and women known only to those in the little audience. Writing in his diary later about the session, Stopolini recalled, "I felt during that first hour that this woman was a charlatan, but a clever and skillful one. As she went through her act." Writing in his diary later about the session, Stopolini recalled, "I felt during that first hour that this woman was a charlatan, but a clever and skillful one. As she went through her act, I studied the faces of the people around her, noting their reactions. They were enthralled, willing to accept anything in whatever tongue that came out of this woman's mouth. I thought, the weaker mind can be molded by the stronger, the gullible be made, no, compelled to believe anything that a more dominant intellect dictates." But Stopolini admitted to being startled later in the session toward the end of the seance. At around 10 in the evening, as the session was drawing to its close, Mrs. Bocca spoke in a strange voice. "That none of us so far had heard," he said. The medium spoke in a soft, pleasing tone, that of a young woman, a voice very unlike her own, which was high-pitched and rather harsh to the ear. The voice that came from Signora Bocca's mouth begged us to have mercy when it pleaded, "Listen to me. Oh, please listen to me." But the leader of this group, being the leader of this group, I felt I had no alternative but to play out the charade to its end, but I still very much doubted the integrity of my guest. I sighed out of impatience and embarrassment, you understand, and then called out in what I felt was my best occult-sounding voice. "Speak, deceased one! We are all listening to you." Stopolini waited for the response. The voice, which came from the medium's lips, was quite clear. "I was born Rosa Manicelli on July 1st, 1900. When I died, I was Rosa Spadoni, though my husband had died by then too. Tonight we both lie in the cemetery at Castel Raimondo, north of Camerino." Stopolini, who later revealed that he was highly amused and deeply impressed by Signora Bocca's conjuring tricks, said, "All of us present knew that cemetery." Stoppellini, who later revealed that he was highly amused and deeply impressed by Signora Bocca's conjuring tricks, said, "All of us present know that cemetery, O dead one, but please, tell us why you come here to seek our assistance." "I am long beyond help, Doctor. I only ask that you now help others, to save them from the fate that befell me." Intrigued despite himself, Stoppellini asked, "And what fate was that, Signora?" 2 days after my death, the death certificate was signed. I was taken to Castle Raimondo in a deep coma. I was placed in the earth and buried alive. A terrified scream suddenly shattered the stunned silence that followed. To his horror, Stoppellini realized that it came from Signora Bocca. The fat woman was clutching her heart as though in mortal agony. She screamed again and fell to the floor in a faint. We cannot guess what motivated Dr. Stoppellini to pursue an investigation into the events that had been recounted that night, but he did study all the documents and circumstances surrounding the death and burial of Rosa Spadoni. We know that he was shaken by his experience with Signora Bocca, and was further disturbed when the medium had a complete nervous breakdown a few days after that session at his home. On September 4th, 1950, the day after the seance, the professor checked the records of the civil hospital in Camerino. He learned that a 39-year-old woman named Rosa Spadoni had indeed died there on October 5th, 1939, and had been buried 2 days later at Castel Raimondo. And the death certificate, the cause of death, was given as brain hemorrhage and had been signed by one of the hospital doctors, himself since deceased. Stoppellini, driven by the demons now haunting him, demanded an exhumation of Rosa Spadoni's body. Despite the fact that there were no surviving relatives to put up any protest, the professor's request was turned down flat. We know he then embarked on a one-man crusade to have Rosa Spadoni's death investigated. He lobbied the Italian government and enlisted the help of the Vatican. And finally, in the spring of 1953, the mayor and the police chief of Camerino gave permission for the exhumation. On April 20th, 1953, a small group of men, including Dr. Stoppellini, the police chief, and the mayor, gathered at Rosa Spadoni's graveside. Also present were 2 pathologists from the Camerino Board of Health, 3 representatives of the Italian government, a priest, and a photographer from the local newspaper. An hour of digging uncovered the casket. Dr. Stoppellini stood in the open grave and raised the coffin lid. None present would ever forget what they saw. For some, the memory would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The skeleton lay on its back, the skull turned slightly to the left. The left arm was bent upward, with the finger bones and 2 of the hand bones thrust into the mouth and throat cavity. The hair that remained on the skull was disheveled, and the knees were bent as if in an effort to force open the coffin lid. But worse, much worse, there were bloody, parallel scratches in the wood of the inside coffin lid, and a single fingernail was still embedded in the soft pine. Plainly, Rosa Spadoni had tried in vain to claw her way out of her dark and narrow casket. How Stoppellini came by his knowledge is irrelevant, the pathologist said in a public statement. We must agree with him that the evidence points to the fact that Rosa Spadoni was buried in a coma when her vital signs were undetected by the attending physician, and that she was wakened in her coffin within an hour or so of burial, when she was beyond all reach of human help or agency. May God rest her soul. The outraged public reaction that followed rocked Italy and even threatened to bring down the government. Within months, Dr. Stoppellini succeeded in his crusade for mandatory embalming of the dead, As the story spread to other European countries, burial practices were also hastily changed. Rosa Spadoni died in the grip of a terror so great that it spurred her long after she was dead to warn of the horrors of premature burial. How she accomplished it is a mystery beyond our understanding.